Peggy Guggenheim, a name synonymous with beauty, scandal, and unparalleled devotion to art, lived a life that was as tumultuous as it was dazzling. Born into opulence, yet shadowed by profound personal tragedies, her journey from the glittering salons of New York to the bohemian enclaves of Paris and the serene canals of Venice is a saga of relentless passion and heartbreak. An enigmatic figure, Peggy was both muse and maverick, collecting not only masterpieces but also a string of notorious lovers and unforgettable soirees. Her story is one of audacious choices, groundbreaking art, and a relentless quest for meaning amidst the chaos. A life woven with the threads of love, loss, and legacy. Join us this week as we look at the fascinating life of Peggy Guggenheim. Marguerite Peggy Guggenheim, born on August 26, 1898, was a scion of two prodigiously wealthy families. Her father, Benjamin Guggenheim, was the son of a prominent mining magnate who, along with his brothers, amassed a formidable fortune in silver, copper, and lead. The Guggenheims' influence and wealth were monumental, reshaping industries and cities alike. Peggy's mother, Florette Seligman, was herself a first-generation American, the heir to a banking dynasty that had not only established financial eminence, but also founded New York's Temple Emmanuel, a beacon of cultural and religious significance. Peggy entered the world in the luxurious confines of one of New York's grand hotels, a prelude to a life steeped in opulence. But her childhood was not to be a happy one. Her early years were spent in a mansion situated across from Central Park, a bastion of grandeur where their neighbors included luminaries such as the Rockefellers and the widow of President Grant. Peggy was the middle child in a family of 3 girls. However, under the storybook exterior, her childhood was miserable. Her father was a serial philanderer, and her mother was emotionally distant. The upkeep of the girls fell to a series of sadistic governesses. Peggy, a precocious child, said to her father one night at dinner, "Papa, you must have a mistress, as you are never home." A few months later, when Peggy was 12, he moved to France ostensibly for business, but his focus was far more on his mistresses there. The girls missed him terribly, especially the youngest, Hazel. She begged her father to come home for her 9th birthday, and he agreed, booking himself passage on the ill-fated Titanic. He was seen helping women and children onto the lifeboats, and is remembered for his notable last moments aboard the ship, where he dressed in his evening clothes and prepared to meet his fate with dignity. According to accounts, he was last seen sitting in a deck chair with his valet, Victor, saying, "We are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen."
We are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down as gentlemen.
His body was never recovered. Florette, in a callous move, blamed the young Hazel for his death. Hazel's life was marked by tragedy, as years later her 2 sons fell off the roof of the Surrey Hotel. Peggy herself suffered a complete mental breakdown after her father's death. When speaking of her childhood, she said, "I never recovered from my father's death. My childhood was excessively unhappy. I have no pleasant memories of any kind." What added to the young girl's sorrows was her deep insecurities about how she looked. She thought her nose looked like a fat potato, and in her teens had a rhinoplasty done. But the surgery, still in its infancy, was botched, causing her more discomfort about her appearance. Though none of this stopped her from amassing lovers. At 21, she inherited $450,000, a sizable sum, but a tiny amount compared to other members of the Guggenheim family. After this, she felt ostracized from the family. "I didn't feel like a real Guggenheim anymore," she said. But Peggy would put her wealth to good use. She took a job in an avant-garde bookstore and became friends with F. Scott Fitzgerald and Alfred Stieglitz. Stieglitz introduced her to modern art, and she was captivated by the work of his wife, Georgia O'Keeffe. She became fascinated with the Bohemian lifestyle, and it would have a profound influence on her entire life. In 1920, she moved to France and pursued the Parisian Bohemian life, rubbing shoulders with avant-garde artists and writers like Brancusi, Barnes, and Marcel Duchamp. Peggy traveled throughout Europe to explore the worlds of classical and Renaissance art. During her travels, she came across some shocking photographs, frescoes from Pompeii showing people being intimate in multiple positions. In her autobiography, Peggy said that she was very curious and wanted to try them all out myself. She would certainly have the chance. Soon after, Peggy found herself in the throes of one of her first romantic entanglements. Lawrence Vail, a respected artist and writer, paid her a visit at her home while her mother was out. During their tête-à-tête, Vail made his intentions clear, attempting to persuade Peggy into an intimate encounter. To his astonishment, she readily agreed. Caught off guard by her unhesitating consent, Vail reconsidered and suggested that, given the possibility of her mother's untimely return, it would be more prudent to rendezvous at his hotel room. With characteristic spontaneity, Peggy donned her hat and, with a glint of resolve in her eyes, responded, "How about right now?" She pursued Vail, who was considered the king of Bohemia, to the altar. However, she so doubted that he would show up that she didn't buy a wedding dress, but show up he did, and the two were married in 1922. The marriage produced 2 children, Sinbad and Pegeen. It also produced abuse and unhappiness. The affection-starved Peggy lavished love on her husband, and he responded by walking on her stomach when she disobeyed him, holding her head under running water, or smearing jam in her hair. In his novel Chasm a Weekend, Lawrence Vail wrote a thinly veiled and unflattering portrayal of her. He described her through the character of a wealthy American woman named Annabella, who is depicted as self-centered, shallow, and difficult. The novel paints Annabella as someone who uses her wealth and social status to manipulate those around her, seeking validation and attention without offering genuine affection or support. Peggy tolerated it all, but what she could not tolerate was his infidelity. When she found out he was having an affair with the novelist Kay Boyle, she quickly put an end to their marriage. She ended up getting custody of Pegeen, while Lawrence got custody of Sinbad. Much like her own mother, Peggy proved to not be very nurturing with her own child, saying, "I would trade you for a Picasso." After her divorce from Vail in 1928, Peggy met British writer and critic John Holmes while she was visiting friends. The day they met, Holmes led her to a tower and kissed her. Peggy wrote in her autobiography that she can attribute everything that followed to that simple little kiss. But much like her previous marriage, Holmes turned abusive. He would make her stand naked in front of the open window in winter, throw whiskey in her eyes, and threaten to use his fists on her face so no one would ever want her. However, Peggy would soon be free, as Holmes, who had sustained an injury while horse riding, needed a simple surgery, but on the day of the surgery, he passed away from a heart attack. With 2 disastrous relationships behind her, Peggy chose to navigate the liberating yet treacherous path of non-committal love affairs. Her carnal appetite was voracious, driven by a profound emotional need and unbridled desire. Legend whispers that Peggy Guggenheim had 3,000 lovers. When asked how many husbands she had, she wittily replied, "Do you mean mine or other people's?" In the aftermath of John Holmes's death, she swiftly moved in with Douglas Garman, the director of a publishing house, whom she and John had met in 1933. In the wake of Holmes's demise, Garman penned a letter of condolence to Peggy. They dined together and soon thereafter became lovers. Douglas Garman, deeply entrenched in the world of leftist publishing, increasingly immersed himself in politics, particularly communist and Marxist circles. He joined the Communist Party of Great Britain and encouraged Peggy to follow suit, which she did, eager to please him. However, instead of remaining by her side, he became a wandering lecturer, leaving Peggy in solitude. Tensions mounted, and the fabric of their relationship began to fray. Eventually, Douglas fell for another woman from the Communist Party and moved away with her. At this juncture, Peggy realized she needed to find purpose and occupation, having been nothing but a wife for the last 15 years. Refusing to succumb to despair, Peggy's friends suggested she open her own art gallery. Embracing this new direction, Peggy moved to London and in 1938 opened her first gallery. It debuted with an exhibition featuring the works of the French artist Jean Cocteau. Peggy's gallery became a beacon of modern art, hosting impressive exhibitions that included works by Henry Moore, Pablo Picasso, and others. Around the time of the opening, Peggy began an affair with the future Nobel Prize-winning Irish author and playwright Samuel Beckett in Paris. They met in 1939 at a dinner thrown by James Joyce. Beckett walked Peggy home to her apartment, but instead of leaving, he stretched out on her sofa and asked her to join him. Beckett's forward seduction techniques soon led to a passionate affair. Despite being financially broke, Beckett reveled in driving her sports cars. One of the most notable anecdotes from their time together was their indulgent 4-day seclusion in a hotel room, only rising to order room service. Though they enjoyed their time together like the rest of Peggy's relationships, their fling soon fizzled out. With the continent headed towards World War II, Peggy continued to increase her collection. With unwavering determination, she made a pledge to buy a picture a day, acquiring works from luminaries such as Picasso, Dali, and Braque, becoming the Bohemian queen of the European art world. During one of her visits to Picasso's studio to purchase a painting, she was met with disdain. Picasso dismissed her with a scornful comment, "Madame, the undergarment department is on the second floor." Undeterred, Peggy continued her mission until she could no longer ignore the ominous clouds of war. She admitted defeat just a week before France did the same. Realizing that her prominent Jewish name made her a prime target, she reluctantly headed back to the USA. She went to great lengths to try and save the paintings, as the German government viewed modern art as degenerate. Before leaving, she asked the Louvre administrators to safeguard her precious paintings. They refused, dismissing modern art as unworthy of their space. Undeterred, she stored her collection in a friend's barn in the Vichy countryside, a makeshift sanctuary for her treasures. At the age of 45, Peggy returned to the United States with an eclectic entourage: her ex-husband, his soon-to-be ex-wife, her 2 children, and the painter Max Ernst. Despite the tumult and uncertainty, Peggy's indomitable spirit and love for art continued to guide her path. Almost as soon as she arrived in New York, she opened another gallery. The gallery was a resounding success and cemented Peggy's status as one of the most influential figures in the contemporary art world. Her influence and collection helped New York to overtake Paris as the capital for modern art. At 42, Peggy married Max Ernst. Reflecting on their wedding, she remarked, "I did not know if he was miserable because he was going to marry me or for some other reason." An ex-lover once quipped, "He is said to be Peggy Guggenheim's consort, number 3812. Their relationship was unconventional, with Ernst sometimes cross-dressing in Peggy's clothes. Continuing her fervent support for the arts, Peggy organized a groundbreaking exhibition called 31 Women, the first all-woman art exhibition in America. It was through this endeavor that Ernst met Dorothea Tanning, a fellow surrealist artist. The two fell in love, and Ernst left Peggy for her. During this tumultuous time, Peggy discovered the painter Jackson Pollock, who was working as a carpenter in her uncle's museum. Despite her admiration for his talent, Pollock was not to become one of her lovers, famously saying, "You would have to put a towel over her head for me to do it." After the war, Peggy was determined to leave the United States again and purchased an 18th century palazzo along the Venice Canal. She lived there in splendor, surrounded by her masterpieces and accompanied by her beloved dogs, often numbering between 10 and 15. She slept on a silver bed crafted by Alexander Calder, a testament to her eclectic taste and passion for art. 3 afternoons a week, Peggy opened her home to the public, allowing visitors to wander through her house and admire the paintings that adorned even the bathroom walls. Meanwhile, she would bask in the sun on the rooftop, embodying the very essence of Bohemian elegance. Peggy hosted soirees that attracted illustrious guests such as Yoko Ono, Tennessee Williams, and Truman Capote. Her numerous consorts included gondoliers and race car drivers, who were her particular favorites. Tragedy struck in 1967 when her daughter, Peggy, an alcoholic and depressed painter, took her own life, leaving behind 4 sons. Peggy was informed of the death by telegram and never recovered from the loss. She remarked, "We were like 2 sisters, friends. Her death has left me quite bankrupt." In homage to her daughter, Peggy transformed a room in the palazzo to display only her daughter's paintings. Peggy Guggenheim, often hailed as the Medici of modern art, spent her final years devoid of company, save for her 14 dogs. She could be seen sailing the canal in her gondola, the last in the city to be privately owned. She once mused, "I adore floating. I can't think of anything as nice since I gave up on sex," or